Welcome to the Rex Andrews Show. Glad to have you. If you're a first-time listener, welcome. We're glad that you tuned in and we have you listening to the program. Don't forget to subscribe if you decide you like what we're doing here. And then also, too, we're not bashful. We'll beg, give us 5 stars. And in fact, I'm a well-dressed beggar. Look, I even have a collar on the shirt today. So well-dressed beggars will beg just like anybody else. So welcome to the show. If you're a return user, we want to say thank you. Thanks to you and our guests, we have cracked the top 10% of the fastest growing podcasts out there. It's pretty exciting. We have listeners in 32 countries on 6 continents. And if we could figure out how to market to penguins and somehow figure out where they could recharge their cell phones, we'd probably have listeners in Antarctica too. Don't forget to subscribe. And then also, I always point this out, we're on all the social media platforms, but the best place to come back and get information about our listeners and our guests is actually at the show website. When we do interviews like we do, we got a great guest today, we only sort of touch the tip of the iceberg. And so their bios are there, links to the things that they're doing. And so please stop by. There are information and content available on every single one of our guests that have come on the show and our upcoming guests. So we generally have about 30 in the queue that are up and coming. So if you want to listen to one of the up and coming, you can schedule it. All right, fantastic. Let's get on to our guest today. Very interesting young lady. She's actually like a travel hound. She's been all over the world. She's been in more than 70 countries at the ripe old age of 22. She's an author, a frequent podcast guest appearance, person. Like I said, world traveler. And she's even has an interesting job. She's a product specialist at Instagram. So I'd like to welcome to the show this morning, Caitlyn Lubas. Caitlyn, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Fantastic. It's a beautiful morning here. I'm just outside of Boulder, so we've had a lot of rain, so it's going to be a sunny day today, so we're excited for that.
Oh, amazing. The sun is shining here in San Francisco as well. Just took a walk, started my day. I'm feeling great.
Fantastic. Okay, so Caitlyn, on the show, it's all about life stories, and you've done quite a bit. But what we like to do here is we like to go back in time and understand who you are and some of the things that formed yourself. I always like to tell people that I have too many interests for one lifetime. And my biggest problem is around the corner is another discovery. So we'd like to do a little discovery with you this morning and talk about, well, where were you born? Where did you grow up? And those can often be different. I had a guest that appeared who moved 63 times before she was 15.
Wow.
Want to know about your family? Do you have siblings? Do you have siblings that survived your harassment? A little bit about your parents, so what did they do while you were growing up? At your age, a good chance your parents might still be with this. So what do they still do? Because that influences a lot. What did you do as a kid? Interests and things. So, whether it was sports or theater, dance, music, computers, shoplifting. And don't laugh at that one. I actually had a guest by the age of 15 was a car thief. So you never know what people are focusing on. And then we'll hopscotch through your education and stuff. And then we'll get on to your story. I mean, you've got an awesome book out and you've traveled the world. So we'd like to do there. So Caitlyn, take us back. Where were you born?
Yeah, I love that you're starting at the beginning. I love the whole concept of like storytelling and knowing origin stories. I think it's so important. So yeah, I am a born and bred Jersey girl. I've lived in New Jersey my whole life, pretty much up until college. I grew up in a small like suburban type of town. Overall, very white, and I'm not white. Well, I'm half white, which I think is an interesting part of my identity and kind of like who I ended up becoming. My dad is Polish, like ethnically, his side of the family is from Poland. And my mom grew up in the Philippines and immigrated to the US when she was a teenager. So I feel like when I was little, I didn't quite understand how unique that was. Just kind of like the concept of having a parent who was an immigrant, like that just didn't register in my mind. It's like, oh, she's my mom. She's cool. It's whatever. Yeah. But I think as I got older and especially realized I had different friends who maybe like their parents were also immigrants from India and like they could like really lean into their culture at home. I didn't get as much of that because my family is a mixed race family. We have half of my family side is white, half of my family side is Filipino or Asian. And I think it's a really tough balance when you're growing up in a mixed race family, because how do you kind of bring in both cultures without kind of like diluting the other one or like making one seem more important than the other? And sometimes you kind of fall down to this almost like common denominator, just like, oh, we'll just be American and we're not going to lean too hard into either of the cultures. But all of this is not stuff that I like recognized consciously when I was little. I was just like, yeah, it's my mom, it's my dad.
Right.
I'm in a school with all these very generically white people, so of course I'm white. Like I very much remember on standardized tests and stuff when I was little, they ask you like check off the box that fits your race, and back then it didn't used to let you check off more than one. And I always had this little bit of an identity crisis where I was like, do I check off Asian or do I check off white? Like what do I do? And I think I actually normally ended up checking off white because I was just like, why would I not want to be like everyone else at my school? Even though I clearly like physically do not look very white, I appear more Asian. So that was always an interesting thing growing up. And I think I actually end up talking about that in my book because it ended up being something that I realized even more when I traveled as like a mixed race person, but we can get into that later. About my parents, my dad is awesome. Like my dad is the coolest person. He's so inspiring. And honestly, I don't think I would be who I am without my dad. Wow, I'm gonna cry. Sorry.
That's okay.
No, he's the type of person who like from a very young age has just like always told me like no matter what you want to do, if you set your mind to it, you can do it. Like you just have to have a determination. You have to have like some sort of plan to get there. But no matter what you want to do, even if it's like going to the moon, you can get there and you can do it. And he's been telling me that since I was little. So I really do think that mindset and that like openness to possibilities and openness to like dreaming big was something really important in my childhood. And my mom is really awesome too. She's just a really bubbly person. And I feel like I learned how to be a good, like charismatic person from my mom. So both of them definitely pivotal people in my life. And I'm like really good friends with my parents. I call them all the time, like love like ranting to them and like talking about my life. So I'm glad I really treasure that relationship I have with my parents.
So
and I have one sister. Sorry, go ahead.
What type of work did your dad do? And if your mom worked, what'd she do too?
Yeah, so my dad works in like cybersecurity, kind of. Like he's not a coder or anything, but he helps businesses like strategize around their IT and like risk and compliance type of things. I always remember when I was little, he just had this really long title that included the words risk and compliance, and I had no idea what that meant. And I've only recently come around to understanding what that is. And my mom used to work in marketing, which is what I also studied. But then she took a break from work for quite some time to kind of like raise me and my sister. And I'm so thankful that she did that. Because I definitely had a great childhood growing up and having my mom around all the time. But now she's back. She's kind of like working as an office manager at a family friend's chiropractor's office. So she's out there doing her thing, being charismatic.
So would you say you kind of had a typical middle class upbringing then?
Yeah, I definitely think so. Like we weren't struggling by any means, but we weren't like super well off by any means either.
Sure. Okay. And then you've got a sister. What's your age difference on your sister?
Yeah, the age difference is the interesting bit. So she's 5 years younger. Her name is Ashley, and she is pretty similar to me, but also loves being very different from me. And I think that's been like one of the defining parts of our relationship is like how can she like shine in her own way. Yeah, she's 5 years younger than me. I feel like it's always a little tough to get a close connection with a sibling when you have that age gap, especially because of the way that when high school in the US is like 4 years and then college is 4 years, you're always like not in the same phase of life if you're at a 5-year age gap. So only recently, like when she's going to college starting in the fall, I feel like now that we're both kind of in the same like adult-ish mindset, we definitely connect on a lot more things. So I've been strengthening that relationship, definitely.
Well, I got 5 kids and I have 3 daughters, and I know that when there's a spread, there's an old saying that's bras and Barbies don't mix. And so when there is that gap, there can be, differences. There's 9 years between my oldest daughter and my youngest daughter. And so, there's, well, actually it's 7 years. But yeah, there's a difference in when you're adults, they do pick up. Okay. So what types of things were you interested in growing up? What type of activities? How did you spend your spare time?
So when I was growing up, I did a lot of kind of like artsy things, I guess. I was in like all these like special art programs at school, like definitely loved like painting, doing pottery, doing like creative things with my hands. Definitely love dancing. I have been a dancer since I was 5, maybe.
Okay.
I did like basic like ballet, hip hop, jazz kind of throughout elementary school, transitioned more to just like hip hop and like more like modern dance during high school, and then stopped during college just because I didn't have the time anymore, but still like just love having dance parties in my room at home. Like I love music. It is such a big part of me. And I dabbled in pretty much every sport ever, but was definitely not good at any of them. I was definitely on the sports teams for the social aspect. Like 2 of my best friends growing up, they were twins and they did sports, like every single sport they were good at, and their dad was involved with coaching us. So yeah, I just kind of joined all the teams to be able to hang out with my friends.
Oh, that's nice. Well, they always say when it comes to dance, you've got to do ballet because it's foundational for
Yeah,
everything else.
definitely.
Yeah. I have a whole big dancing background with all my daughters that dance. So
Oh, nice.
they're fantastic. Okay. So after high school, what was the next top? You said you were no longer in New Jersey after high school.
Yeah, so after high school, I moved to New York City, which had like always been a dream of mine. And it's so funny because growing up, my birthday, I would always just want a weekend in New York. That was the best birthday present I could have gotten.
Hmm.
And my mom's cousin's husband actually ended up being a like hotel manager in New York. So we were always able to get a really nice room like in Times Square where you could see the whole city, see all the lights, see all the
Sure.
really tiny people looking down from the tall
Yep.
buildings. And that was always so fascinating to me as a kid. And the prospect of actually getting to live in New York City and not just spend like a day or 2 days there
Yeah.
was so exciting to me. And it definitely is so different living in New York and kind of like breathing in the energy of the city every day. It's so inspiring. And it definitely is the kind of place where you just like feel everyone hustling and bustling and like you thrive on momentum, and it just pushes you to be a more productive, more like ambitious, more interesting type of person.
Yeah, I used to, one stop in my career. I used to live outside of New York, but I spent almost all my time in New York. So it's a
Hmm.
very unique place in the United States. That's for sure. It has its own
Yeah.
charm. So, all right. So tell me, how'd you get this started off on this travel? I mean, you're not that old, and you've been in a lot of places. So, what was the pivot point that started the travel?
Yeah, for sure. So I think for me, I knew from probably when I was 16 in high school and like started looking at colleges that I wanted to go to a school that would let me study abroad at least once, if not twice or more, just
Okay.
because I knew that traveling was something that I wanted to do. And I guess like the reason why I knew that at that kind of young age that I wanted to prioritize travel was probably a big result of my family. Like we weren't crazy big travelers or anything, but my parents definitely made an effort to go on like 1 or 2 family trips a year, whether that's
Right.
domestically or like once we went to Europe, once we went to Asia, nothing super extensive. Like I didn't travel the whole world with my parents, but they definitely gave me that hint of like a travel bug,
Yep.
meaning I know what it's like to go to a new country. I know what it's like to just be super enthralled by like seeing a new language, trying new foods, seeing how people look differently and act differently in different parts of the world. And I think that definitely piqued my curiosity really early on. And I knew I wanted to spend my kind of formative college years really investing in exploring the world and at the same time exploring myself in that way. Um, and it's funny because I didn't even realize this because my grandpa passed away when I was quite young, but he actually used to run a travel agency, which I did not even know when I was little. But it's really funny now that that seems like travel is in my genes in a way.
Hmm. So, was it through school that you started traveling?
Yeah, so basically, I started my first year at NYU, spent New York City, or spent my first fall in New York City, and then in the spring, there was the first opportunity for me to take a class that involved an international trip. So the spring semester of my first year of college, I was in this social entrepreneurship class that centered around kind of like us as students partnering with this village in Ghana called Weje Chachwe, that 2 of the professors at my school had a I think like a 4 or 5 years long relationship with this village where they would bring students there every year, kind of like help them work on projects and just basically try to really just like jumpstart an economy in this small little village. Because basically the story was that when our professors first got in contact with this village, the women of the village were pretty much spending their whole day like sitting under a tree, not doing too much,
Right.
while the men were all out fishing, kind of like generating income and value for their families. And my professors were thinking that it's really and a lost opportunity. Like these women can be doing something to not only just make use of their time in a productive way, but also like to help generate income for their family and
Sure.
better their lives and everything. So the original idea was to help these women kind of learn the traditional skill of like batik fabric printing, which involves like taking a block and dipping it in ink and stamping it all over
Sure.
a piece of fabric. And so the women learned this skill, but also still needed kind of like business guidance or acumen to really decide like, how do we translate just this craft and this skill into a way to make value? So one of like basically our class assignment was to help this village and specifically the women in this village to form their own brand around like, how can we sell this traditional African batik fabric, not only in a local market in Ghana, but even can we make products like bags and laptop cases that are super unique, handmade in a different country? How can we market that to people in the US? So I was able to work on that during my semester at home or in New York City. And then also we got to go to Ghana and do some like actual work on the ground with the women in the village, got to see the batik making process, got to do some humanitarian work as well of like helping them build a well, helping them build a school building, teaching the kids a bit in the village. It was such a pivotal experience in my life. And it's really funny because like Ghana is a place that most people have never been to and probably
Sure.
don't even have an intention to go to. So I kind of consider it my first place that I kind of went to an off the beaten path kind of destination. And I think the value in doing that was that it opened my mind to the possibility of like going to other off the beaten path destinations and just kind of making that a reality and making me want to do that more. So I actually opened up my book with this memory that I was sitting in this mud hut in Ghana where I had like spent a night in this village. And I just remember waking up and thinking, if I'm 18 and I'm in Ghana right now, I have about 3 years left of college. I think that I will get the most learning and growth out of going to as many countries as possible, and specifically going to all 7 continents to get as many diverse perspectives as possible.
Okay.
And it was like at that moment that I really decided to make travel my like #1 priority for the next 3 years.
So were you able to do school online and still travel, or how did you work out the logistics of that?
Yeah, so I actually never did online school, despite online school and like Zoom University being a whole thing the past year. I actually never did that because I graduated in December of 2019, like right before the pandemic hit. So I've never
Sure.
done an online class. But the way I was able to kind of make it happen was just doing a lot of study abroad semesters and even short-term experiences that weren't a full semester long. So after my Ghana experience, the first semester of my second year of school, I was able to spend in Florence, Italy through NYU Florence. So NYU is the school I went to near New York University. It is a school that has a pretty big network of like global sites that students
Sure.
can go to, and it's very seamless to get there. Like literally they make it so easy that to the point where you can walk onto the NYU campus in Florence. You don't even need to input a new Wi-Fi password on your phone. Like it is just instantly connected. You are plugged in, you're taking taking same classes with your fellow NYU students. Feels super comfortable. So it's a great jumping off point for anyone who maybe is scared about going abroad and wants to like eliminate some of that uncertainty. Kind of just felt to me like we picked up NYU, dropped it in Florence, and got to benefit from all like the comforts of a familiar university and familiar people while also being in a totally different context. So I definitely learned a lot from that semester. And when I was in Europe, I mean, Europe is the best place, I think, for super quick, like hopping around different weekend trips because
Sure.
you have super budget airlines like Ryanair. And I have gotten flights for as cheap as literally $2 to go from like Milan to Warsaw, which is not something I knew was possible before,
Sure.
but budget airlines are great. There's also overnight buses. I went from like Italy to Germany for like $17 on an overnight bus, got to go to Oktoberfest for a weekend, came back, did my classes. There's also trains. I mean, there's just so much accessibility of travel in Europe. That was definitely a great place for me to kind of start that experience of going on weekend trips. Like I had 3-day weekends every week because we didn't have class on Fridays. So I would spend those 3 days traveling to a different country in Europe, coming back late Sunday night, just grinding for school, and then kind of going off again every single week for the whole semester.
Fun. So when you were in Ghana, did you spoke out any from, kind of from there to neighboring countries, or were you just in Ghana?
So I was only in Ghana for 1 week. It wasn't a semester. So
Okay.
I was just in the country, kind of immersed in the village, but we did also get to visit the capital of Accra and kind of like seeing nightlife in a different country, especially
Sure.
one country like Ghana that we all tend to kind of think is like maybe a more like impoverished country is kind of like what most people think of it. There was such affluence in the clubs in Accra. It was really crazy to see and gave me a lot of perspective.
Okay. So I want to know, because I'm curious, how did you hop over to Antarctica? I mean, that's not a destination many people go to. I mean, Ghana's certainly not. But tell me a little bit about how you got down to Antarctica.
Yeah, so basically, fast forward 3 years, I graduated university in December of 2019 and knew that Antarctica was a place I wanted to go to. So I booked that trip to Antarctica like a full year in advance because
Wow.
there's such a small supply of like ships that will take you to Antarctica. You have to pretty much plan in advance, and it is quite expensive as well. So I also had that like three-way lead up time for me to have that goal of like, I need to save up money for this trip to Antarctica. I was always putting money away for it through all the jobs I worked every semester and every summer. But yeah, basically the way you get to Antarctica is you fly into Ushuaia, which is a city in Argentina that is the southernmost city in the world.
Yep.
And that is kind of the hub where all of these small boats will take people from Argentina down to the Antarctic Peninsula. And that journey from Argentina to the peninsula is about 2 days long, crossing the Drake Passage, which is
Sure.
one of the roughest seas in the world.
Yep.
I heard stories from my captain that in past experiences, there's been like 40 or 50-foot waves in the Drake Passage. We got super lucky and it was a relatively mild trip. So we actually made it in almost record time of like only a day and a half rather than 2 days. But I still felt like it was the roughest experience I had ever experienced on a ship.
Sure.
Like I was laying in bed all day of just like, I cannot get up. My stomach is going to flip. So I can't even imagine what it'd be like in a worse situation. But yeah, after the 2 days, we finally saw our first icebergs, saw our first penguins, kind of like got into the Antarctic region, and actually then got to get off the boat and step foot on an island that is part of Antarctica. And I remember the first day, like going on shore, stepping on Antarctica, seeing penguins, like a plethora of penguins just everywhere. It was one of the happiest moments of my life.
Now, were you there? How long were you in Antarctica?
Yeah, so most of the trips are about 10 days long for like the average traveler. If you want to go and do like hitting up multiple different islands, multiple different parts of the Antarctic Peninsula, there's ones that are like 20 plus days. I did a 10-day trip. So basically the first day and a half we were sailing there, and same on the tail end, we had like a day and a half sailing back. So we were on the actual continent for about 7 to 8 days, like a full week.
Yep.
And it was great. Every single day we got to explore a different part of Antarctica in the morning, took the boat, went to a different one in the afternoon, got to explore. Yeah.
How fun. What a great experience. What time of year were you down there? Were you down there in their winter or summer?
So definitely have to go in the summer.
Yes.
So the summer in the Southern Hemisphere is in the winter
Here.
of New York. So it was actually interesting. I went pretty much right after Christmas and actually was in Antarctica on New Year's Eve of when the year turned into 2020, which was just such an anomalous way to start a very anomalous year. So it's kind of poetic when I think about it now. But yeah, I went in that time frame around Christmas and New Year's. And it's funny because New York City has a lower average temperature at the time of year than the Antarctic Peninsula. People think Antarctica is super cold, but because it's summer there, it's actually pretty doable. You just need to like bundle up.
Well, okay, so fast forward a little bit, or you wrote a book. So let's talk about your book. I know that travel was the inspiration for that. So tell us about your book.
Yeah, definitely. So I started writing this book called You Are Where You Go. And I think the title pretty much speaks for itself, but it really gets into the thesis that you are a reflection of everywhere you've ever chosen to be, whether that's traveling, whether that's moving somewhere domestically, like you just become, everywhere you go becomes a part of you, and you can learn and grow a lot through all of those different places and the people you meet, the experiences you have in each place. And really the mission and like the vision for this book is that I want to inspire other young people to also prioritize travel, because there's tons of books written from maybe people in their middle-aged years or even like in retirement when they've been able to travel a lot. And that's fantastic. I still love those books and love hearing about those journeys. But I think it's something really special that if you can set your mind to prioritize travel when you're young, you get even more benefits of all that growing and learning because you're doing it in the formative years of your life, and you can learn all these perspectives to help you make better decisions in the future, rather than, I think, like the typical person would say like, oh yeah, I'll get around to traveling when I retire and I have more time and more money. But what I've learned is really that you have a lot of time in college. You have your summers, you have your spring breaks, you have your winter breaks.
Sure.
And so then more of the barrier starts being people think they don't have the money to do it, but you can definitely travel for cheap. And if you hustle enough, you can definitely find side jobs or like internships to work at that will help you get the money to fund these travels.
Fantastic. So when did you publish your book?
So it actually is not published yet. It is coming
okay.
out later this year. I'm still working on it right now. I finished my manuscript, handed it off to my publisher to do some copy editing, and I'm actually working on the cover design right now, which is super exciting.
Fantastic. Do you have it titled yet, or are you still rattling that around?
Yeah, so the full title is You Are Where You Go, A Traveler's Coming of Age Journey. And each of the chapters is basically a short story about one of my experiences in a different country, different part of the world that really taught me something. And I really try to focus on like, what was that key takeaway? Because I think tying a place to a certain lesson or to a certain perspective that I gained from it is kind of the best way to show through examples that anywhere you go, you learn and grow from it.
Okay. So do you have a website or social media that you can give out so people can find you?
Yeah, definitely. So you are welcome to go to my website, www.youarewhereyougo.com, and you can sign up for my mailing list. I'll be sending out updates as I go through this publishing process. I think it's a really fun activity to try to make it more of a community effort of like, I'm not just going to write this book in silence and then put it out, but I want to involve people in the process and like give updates and like kind of give a sneak peek of behind the scenes. What is it like to write a book when you're 22 also? So you can sign for the mailing list there, and you can follow on social media. On Instagram, it's You Are Where You Go. You can also follow my personal social media, Caitlyn Lubas. That's spelled CAITLYNLUBAS on Instagram or Twitter or pretty much anything.
Okay. So, you know, the 70 countries you've been to, you're a very positive person. So I kind of understand how you might answer this question. Where was your least favorite place that you went?
I don't like being asked this question because I don't think that my opinion of someplace being bad should potentially influence someone else's opinion,
Oh, that's all
because
right. No, I'm talking to you.
it's so subjective.
This is
Yeah,
your story.
I just wanted to preface that
All
because I
right,
don't want
this
anyone
is
to
your
think
story. Okay.
negative overall. But yeah, I think for me, I do think I had probably like the worst experience in Japan, which is really ironic because I was looking forward to it. Probably one of the most places out of all the places I traveled to during my semester in Singapore. I like wanted to spend my fall break in Japan. I knew it was a place I wanted to go to and spend a lot of time in, but we just had the worst luck on this trip. Like, we had planned to hike Mount Fuji. I had gone to the store in Singapore, like bought all the gear I needed. And then like 2 days before we got to Japan, there was a typhoon warning. So there was no way we were going to be hiking. And then it ended up raining pretty much the whole time. So we just stayed in Tokyo, kind of could only do indoor things. Even I was traveling with some friends who were like super, super on a budget and like weren't the most interested in kind of like cultural food and things. So like we did not really explore a lot of Japanese food. Like our first meal in Japan was going to a Mexican restaurant just because it was the cheapest and most available place we could find, which is so ironic and not how I would have pictured my Japan trip to go at all. But you know, you roll with the punches, you make the most of it.
Sure. And then, of course, the opposite of that, what would be one of your favorite places or experiences? Because I agree with you. I've done extensive amount of travel with through business. It's funny, I haven't done that much leisure, but mostly through business. And there's some places I wouldn't go back to, and it had nothing to do with how wonderful the country was. It was that particular trip, you know.
Right.
Getting sick somewhere or something like that. So where was one of the ones that you just were enamored with as one of your favorites?
It's so hard to pick. Can I do rapid fire, like one from each continent?
Sure, yeah, one from each continent then.
All right. So, I mean, I think overall, like over everything, Antarctica is one of my favorite places. It is just so unique, and penguins are my favorite animal. I learned so much on that trip. Definitely high up there. Within South America, I am such an advocate for everyone needs to go to Argentina. It is such an amazing country, has so much in it. Like, you can go to Buenos Aires, get the city experience, go up to Iguazu Falls at the border of Brazil, see the largest network of waterfalls in the world. You can go down to Patagonia and do hiking through all the mountains, and best hiking ever, like hiking capital of the world. Also amazing food, just loved Argentina overall. Within Europe, I'm always torn between saying that Slovenia or Malta are my favorite places. They're kind of like the hidden gems of Europe. It's not your typical
Sure.
Paris, Rome, London, but I went on solo trips to both of those places and ended up having an amazing time just exploring it by myself. Really beautiful scenery, awesome, unique food, and really friendly people. And then within Africa, I stopped in Zambia for a few days on an overland safari I was doing, and Zambia just blew my mind. I wasn't expecting much from it because I honestly did not have much context on what to
Sure.
expect, but we went on a game drive in one of the national kind of like game reserves, and we were able to spot a leopard there. And if you haven't been on a safari before, I had no idea before I went, but spotting a leopard is really, really hard. They're very elusive. They tend to hide in trees or like stalk in the grass.
Sure.
So some people could go an entire like 7 week safari without getting any close encounters or like seeing a leopard. And we saw one not once, but twice on this trip. And it was like 10 feet away from our little like truck. I've never had such fear, but also amazement and like a mix of emotions all at once, other than when this leopard was standing 10 feet away from me. I was in an open door car. It could have chosen to pounce on me and kill me, but it did not.
That's great.
And yeah, Zambia was great. Had also amazing, like best sunrise I've ever seen in my life from there. Then hopping over to Asia, I loved Laos. I also went into that country like not knowing too much context on what to
Yeah.
expect, but we had done a really unique experience where we started in the city of Luang Prabang on like a long boat, which is like a really skinny wooden slow boat that just floats down the Mekong River. And we stayed in a village overnight on our way to get to the Thailand side of the river. And when we woke up from this village in the morning, we could see elephants just like getting water from the riverside. Like it's not like the deer I see in my backyard back home in
Sure.
New Jersey. Great experience. And then I also loved Australia. It is definitely a country that I had always wanted to go to. Like I knew I always wanted to study abroad in Australia. And I never actually did study abroad there because it kind of didn't make sense in my other plans. But I did spend 2.5 weeks there after a semester abroad in Singapore. And I loved Australia. The people are great. I love the accents. There's such a diversity of landscape from like the Daintree rainforest up north to the Great Barrier
Sure.
Reef to the coastal cities and everything. So yeah, those are a few of my faves.
Okay. So you're in tech right now as a product specialist over at Instagram. You think you'll stay in tech?
I do think so. I think because basically the reasons I wanted to go into tech in the first place, one, I really value work-life balance. And I think coming from a business school where a lot of my peers were going into finance and consulting and were
Sure.
just very willingly signing up for 80 to 100-hour work weeks, that was definitely not a path I wanted to pursue for myself.
Hmm.
I really like how tech companies kind of focus on you as a person, not just as an employee. Like you're not just a
Sure.
resource to them. You actually can say, I'm logging off outside of 9 to 5. You don't bother me. I will not answer. I'll talk to you tomorrow. I definitely value that. So I definitely see myself staying in it for that reason. But also really just like the ability to have an impact at a tech company. Like the great thing with the internet and technology is that everything is scalable at such a rate that's not possible with like physical goods. So yeah, I mean, I'm super passionate about connecting with other people, and that's kind of what led me to work in social media specifically, because even from a very young age, back in middle school, I had like 15,000 followers on Twitter because I was really involved in like the Ed Sheeran music fan scene, which just feels like a second life of mine. But I had friends all over the world at a very young age, and that was only possible through the internet and through technology and through social media. So getting to now work at a company like Instagram, which I am a super active user of Instagram stories specifically, which is the product I work on actually. It helps me keep in touch with my friends from all around the world. It's a really nice way to get a glimpse into someone's life without actually being able to physically be with them there in person. So
Sure.
I love it. I'm super invested in the job.
Fantastic. Well, you've been very transparent in helping us understand your story, and excited for you to get your book out. Once it comes out, we'll have to get you back on. So
Thank you.
I always ask this of all my guests because there's it's kind of an interesting way to open up a little bit of view to the people. You know, we have this concept here in the Western world, Western cultures, of a bucket list. You know, the things that we want to do before we're time on earth is done, but there's always an opposite of everything in the universe. And so there's a list that's opposite of the things we'd love to do. It's the things we don't want to do. It rhymes with bucket and starts with an F, but I won't say that. Okay. So that's a list. And in fact, I've met the bucket list guy. He's from Australia, Trav
Oh,
Bell. So he's a great, listen to episode 60. He's a great character, funny as heck.
sweet.
So I'll give you a couple examples of things that wouldn't be on my bucket that are on my effort list. I will never, ever again do a Lakota Sioux sweat lodge. The concept of excessive heat, excessive humidity, excessive drumming, and excessive chanting all at one time. No, not doing that again. Sardines.
Sounds interesting, though.
Well, it was interesting. I did an episode on it. I will never do it again. Sardines, I won't do those. Sorry, I don't want to eat something that looks like it could swim at me, so I'm not going to do that. And I've traveled around the world, so I've had interesting things in the Amazon to eat. So what might be a thing or two that would be on your effort list?
Huh. That's a really hard question because I am definitely of the opinion that I will try anything once.
Okay.
I don't think there's anything I would absolutely refuse to do.
Well, but you've been in a lot of places that maybe you've tried some things once that you're like, I don't think I'll do that again.
Yeah, that's fair. There's definitely things I wouldn't do again. So if you're asking more about that,
well, no, I'm just asking about things that you have no interest in doing. I mean, people have all kinds of things, right? So something that might be on that effort list. Because see, the next time someone talks about a bucket list, you're going to remember this conversation.
For sure. Yeah, it's a really interesting question that I haven't previously considered, but I would definitely say I am not a fan of eating bugs. I tried it once. In Cambodia, we went to this place called the Bugs Cafe. I think it was in the same area where Angkor Wat is. I'm blanking on the name. But this cafe served like deep fried tarantula and crickets in a wok and like spring rolls with ants in them. And I'm very progressive about like the future of food and like definitely believe in like sustainability and moving away from meat, but eating bugs is not something I can ever get behind. Like I tried to eat this deep fried tarantula and just like could not do it. There's a really funny video of me just like absolutely freaking out when I tried to put a cricket in my mouth. That's on my effort list for sure.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thanks for coming on today. I appreciate your time and your story. And you're an inspiration to all kinds of people, not just young people, but anybody that wants to have that travel bug or just go do some neat, interesting experiences. That's the whole reason I have the show, is to tell stories, because everybody is a accumulation of their experiences, and experiences are the best way to learn. So thank you very much, Caitlyn. It's been good to meet you.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time. This has been a great conversation. I'm glad I got to share my stories.
Fantastic. Okay, folks, we'll call that an episode for today. Again, don't forget to stop by the show website, rexandrewshow.com. Caitlyn's bio and all of our guest bios are out there, and links to all the things they're doing, because again, we never have enough time to tell their entire stories. So until next time, the things I always say to everyone at the end of the show, be safe, but be bold, and make it a great day.